let's switch to as dysfunctional a family relationship as you can find, progressives and unions. Now, unions exist, obviously, to keep their members and their members' jobs alive, safe, vital, and properly compensated. And a lot of that is ipso facto opposed to right-wing values, profits uber alles, social and business Darwinism. But it is not a clean picture. I'm sure you've already figured that out. Thomas Neuburger blogs as Gaius Publius. He took his cue for a current column from The Intercept with its post, Carpenters, Steamfitters, and Other Trade Unions Coalesced Around Notorious Ferguson Prosecutor. Why? That article probed union backing for Bob McCulloch, whose half-hearted failed prosecution of Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson got him off the hook for shooting Mike Brown. Wesley Bell knocked him out of contention for the November election. Yay. Bell has the makings of a real progressive. He believes in prison and justice reform to address bail inequality and massive black incarceration rates. Did the union stand against him just to save jobs? Tom says it is more complicated than that. His post is on his website, Down with Tyranny, and at this very moment, he is on the other end of the phone line. Hi, Tom.
How are you, Angie? Good to be with you.
I'm glad to have you. Thanks. Yeah, it's a natural shared interest for corporations and unions to unite over keeping the industries alive and to some extent jobs alive. But that's not at play here, where unions backed a non-progressive status quo with a racist standard. So break that down a bit. When it isn't about jobs and when it isn't about saving industries, what's going on there?
Well, this is interesting, and thank you for noting the piece. The thing that was interesting to me was actually a second thing, not the first thing. The first thing you mentioned, that unions and I like your language, a dysfunctional family. Unions and progressives don't see eye to eye a lot. As I said at the beginning of the piece, the progressive movement is far and away a good friend of labor. The labor movement seems far less a friend of progressives, and that's, to me, always been true. I mean, I've seen that my whole life. What is interesting to me is that over the last, let's say, 10 years, since the blogosphere started, so since maybe 03, 05 or so, and since, especially because I pay attention to climate, the Keystone Pipeline situation, I was in a lot of strategy meetings with progressives where progressives would be embarrassed to or felt awkward if anybody raised the idea that it was unions that were going to try to bring them down. Mm-hmm. Because there seemed to be this feeling that we have to support unions because trade unionism is a highly progressive idea. In fact, it really is a highly progressive idea, that we're for unions, therefore we can't do things that bring unions into disrepute, and they kind of ignored the idea that these unions were their enemies and they were working for the other side. And how do they deal with that? Well, how do they deal with that when they're talking to each other even? So what I noticed in the Ryan Grimm and Aida Chavez piece is that all of a sudden in the Intercept, people who have very strong progressive credentials, that both the Intercept and these writers are asking the question out loud, are saying, this seems to be a bifurcation. What's going on here? And it's the out loudness that caught my interest. As you mentioned, it's been pretty obvious that unions have been on the other side since Nixon with the silent majority, mm-hmm. since Reagan with the Reagan Democrats. I mean, since Trump? Where the Fox News contingent in the white working class has been strongly pro-Trump. I mean, those people haven't gone away. We've just got a multi-headed beast here. And as you said in your introduction, it doesn't do to look at just one head and characterize the beast.
This has overtones to me, Tom, of the elite working class divide. And I know that, like every other generalization, that is deeply, deeply flawed. But over the years, I have seen a number of people, I live on the coast, you live on the coast, people who live in urban areas have trouble making the case to people who work in the coal industry, people who work in the oil industry, saying, look, this is an ultimate good if we eliminate your industries. And it's a very hard case to make, and I can imagine a simmering resentment, much as we hear with so many other issues that divide the urban from the suburban from the rural.
All of that is true. When it comes to the pipeline, these people were fighting for a lie. And they probably knew that it was a lie. They were fighting for 40 jobs, which were permanent, and a whole bunch of temporary jobs when, after the pipeline was built, was going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at the laborers' union, the LIUNA, which is a notoriously right-wing Fox News kind of union. Those people were only going to be digging or carting during construction. These are construction jobs. These are not permanent maintenance jobs for the pipeline themselves. So what else is going on? I'll say it just straight up. These are people that hate the hippies. They've hated the hippies since Nixon. It's in that culture, and it has carried through even into, what does Trump appeal to? He appeals to that sentiment. Now, as you say, unions are not a single thing. You've got a lot of people of color working in the unions these days, and you've got an awful lot of pro-Bernie members working in a lot of these unions. So you've also got divides between the union members and their leaders. The people who are especially ensconced in those union CEO offices who are never going to leave or going to try to never leave. So you've got that divide as well. There was a version of this piece. I'll end with this because I know you want to ask something else. But there was a version of this piece that was printed at Naked Capitalism in the last few days, and that commentary group, the commentariat at Naked Capitalism, is excellent. Quite a few people who weighed in that comment section were union members and offered an awful lot of thoughts about what they thought, because I presented the post as questions, not answers.
Right.
And they offered a number of answers that triangulated this in a whole lot of different ways. You can slice through this cake in a lot of ways and get information with each slice. So I just want to lay that out there. I don't think there's an answer. I think there are answers. And I'm just so glad that progressives are starting to ask the questions, because those answers will be helpful.
Do you see this, and again, your article posits questions and not answers, but your take on this, do you see this as one of the larger issues of the traditional Democrats versus the progressives that we see playing out in so many other facets?
Boy, that depends on how you would define larger. How would you define the larger issues? What criteria would you use?
Well, we see the blue dogs versus the yellow dogs, and we see that the progressives, the stronger their voice gets, the more we see that just as the unions aren't necessarily the liberals' friends, the Democrats, for those who haven't gotten the memo, are not necessarily the progressives' friends. That's one of the phenomena that worries me as we go into 2020, is that we can see such strong divisions in the responses to Trump and his allies that I hope we can get it together. So that's my version of the larger picture.
Yes, I disagree with a lot of people in that I see Trump as not the issue, but an issue among many. My model for what's been going on is that there are 3 armies in the field, not 2, and the other 2 armies both hate us being the progressive army. The first army that hates us is the Obama and Clinton Democrats, who control the party. They aren't the whole of the party, but they're in control of it. And the other is the radical right, which has gotten control of the Republican Party and which is skillfully using Trump to achieve their ends, the Koch brothers' ends. If we don't defeat both armies, we're in deep trouble. So both armies. We can't go back to Clintonism and expect that the country will say, oh, that solves the Trump problem, because before there was a Trump problem, there was a Sanders problem in the Democratic Party. So you're bringing out the split. I think the split is absolutely critical. I think that the most important thing that I've seen in the last year or two has been progressive Democrats recognizing that mainstream Democrats, corporate Democrats, and new Dems are their enemy and are acting like it. Because frankly, those people have been punching progressives in the face for the last 10 years. It's about time that the progressives started to fight back, and in recognition of that. As a subset of that dynamic, recognizing that some unions and some union leadership and progressive union that lead progressive union members have been punching progressives, hippies, however you want to call it, hippie punching in the face for the last 10 years is also important. I'll give you one example about unions. One of the people who wrote in that comment section said, "I'm a member of IATSE," which I'm sure you know, Angie,
right. Mm-hmm.
but it's a big union in Hollywood. It's a big trade union, one of the craft unions they call it. The members jumped all over their leadership because IATSE leaders went for Clinton early and hard. And obviously the connection between Hollywood funding and the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party is very, very strong. So the unions represented that interest, which is the money in Hollywood. But the members were very much pro-Bernie, and were just their interests were shunted aside by the leaders who were currying favor with the Democratic Party. The leaders will say, "We're doing that because the Democrats, the mainstream of the Democratic Party, is where our interests lie because they're going to win, not progressives." But I think there are obvious cultural clues there as well.